Hello, I'm open to Module 3 in Week 2. So this is the second module that you'll be doing in Week 2. And this one will be covering Chapter 4. And it's stress also, but it's looking at the biopsychosocial factors of stress as well as the resulting illness from stress. So let's take a look. Here's your to-do list for you for the week. I'm going to jump to the objectives. So we're also covering 2 more bodily system modules along with this chapter. So the cardiovascular system and the immune system. And the information about these is located in Chapter 2. I know it says modules, and that can be confusing, but that's only because Chapter 2 breaks down the body systems by modules as well. Okay, so we're looking at the cardiovascular system and the immune system here along with Chapter 4 because this whole chapter is dedicated to looking at how stress in particular affects the cardiovascular system. There are direct relationships, direct correlations with how our body responds to stress and its effects on our cardiovascular system, as well as immunoresponses from stress. So looking at how illness results from stress factors. Okay, so I've given you the objectives in understanding what you need to know for the cardiovascular system, different factors about it, understanding how it operates, as well as the immune system, what's its role in fighting off stress and combating disease and all of that. In Chapter 4 of Serafino and Smith, we get into more detail about stress. So now you have a good understanding from Chapter 3 about the factors involved in stress, and here we dig a little deeper. So understanding the relationship between stress and immune outcomes, as well as personality, and you're getting a little bit of that already from the Longevity Project, where it's all about personality and its effect on health. Here we're going to dive into specifically type A behavior pattern and its connection to coronary heart disease. A person who is type A has a high correlation or a higher rate of having coronary heart disease. So we'll kind of look at the factors revolving around that, looking at how people adapt to stress over time and illnesses such as PTSD. What is social support and why is it important in someone's stress response? How can it play a role in buffering the effects of psychosocial stress? Okay, so I'm not talking about physical stress here, but psychologically, how does stress affect us? And what's the role of important other people who are in our social support network in helping to buffer some of that stress? We'll learn about the various ways people use and receive social support, and then some hypotheses that talk about how social support helps. So the direct effects hypothesis and the buffering hypothesis are just 2 ways of understanding how social support plays that important role in our stress response. And people who don't have it, who do not have a strong social support system, are much more vulnerable and open to the negative effects of stress. We'll then look at what happens when we feel we have no personal control over our stressors. And I would say that COVID is a really great example of how people are stressed out by this virus. And the main primary reason is because they feel they have no control. And so we try to give control back, right? That's kind of one of the goals of social distancing and requiring masks, is because by eliciting some degree of control over the environment, people feel a little safer. They feel a little less stressed. Not only do they have less likelihood of contracting the virus, but also, control is just a huge element in our psychology, right? And how we understand our circumstances. There are health benefits that come from having some sort of control. And so what we do in health psychology is we try to teach people ways of increasing personal control over their stress. Your job may be the source of stress. You may not be able to change your job. You may have to deal with it. But what are ways that you could maybe have different degrees of control over the stress you feel from your job? And if we can pinpoint that and understand that, it can help us to mitigate the effects of that stress from our job. We'll learn about optimism and pessimism as coping strategies and how that relates to one's explanatory style. We all have ways of explaining how things happen in our lives, whether or not we are at fault for those things, what our role is in those things. We can be optimistic, we can be pessimistic, but both come with ramifications. So we'll be taking a look at that, as well as this concept called learned helplessness. When we become in a state of having no control, feeling helpless, inactive, not able to take the reins of our lives, and how this is linked to depression. On the flip side of that, the concept of hardiness involves different personality traits and characteristics that make one person more resilient to stress, and it has a lot of health benefits, as does emotional disclosure, telling someone how you feel, writing about it, letting it out. It's cathartic in many different ways of mitigating the effects of stress, as well as sense of coherence. So we'll be talking about those concepts. A little bit more diving into personality and how one's just personality traits inherent in who they are can pose a vulnerability to our health or make us more resilient. In what ways do personality traits, and we tend to think of like the big five, right? The 5-factor model of personality: conscientiousness, openness, neuroticism, extroversion, introversion. These are different aspects of one's health, openness to experience. And where you lie on those 5 factors can often dictate how you're going to manage stress and how it's going to affect you. And again, being able to explain type A behavior pattern. And this is a good bridge to some of the concepts in the cardiovascular system module, so be looking for that there. The diathesis stress model is more of a biopsychosocial approach to stress and understanding where stress comes from and how it affects the body, that we all have a certain set point given to us by genetics of how stress is going to affect us. For some of us, it takes very little stress, external stress, to manifest into illness. So diathesis is really just the manifestation of illness. How does it come out? Different people display stress in different ways. Some people can't eat when they're stressed. Some people eat too much. Some people get sick really easily when they're stressed out. Other people don't sleep. So everyone is affected by stress in a different way. And the diathesis stress model talks about the role of genetics and the role of environment in those two pathways to understanding how each person uniquely deals with stress. Why is it that some people, it only takes a little bit of stress to set them off and make them ill and give them anxiety, and other people can handle much more before they get ill or they get an anxiety disorder or a mental illness. We'll also look at the various pathways that lead to illness, so what physiological changes happen in the body that increase one's risk for illness. We'll be looking at particular systems of the body through the cardiovascular system, immune system, endocrine system that you've already looked at in the previous module as well as this one here. Want to be able to explain the area of psychoneuroimmunology, which is basically just the interactions of your mind, your neurochemistry, and your immune system, and how different psychosocial elements can affect your immune system. Looking at the different psychophysiological disorders that affect the immune system, as well as the respiratory system, digestive system, and cardiovascular system. There's a whole host of physiological disorders that are brought on by psychological elements. So we can actually make ourselves sick in how we think about things and how our brain processes, right? So our cognitions and what we're feeling can actually manifest in disorder. And so the chapter covers a good deal of different disorders in various systems of the body, how our white blood cells respond to stress, how our breathing in our respiratory system responds to stress. Asthma is often triggered by stress response, as well as different elements in the environment. But stress can definitely be a precursor. And so some of those things we'll take a look at as unique psychophysiological disorders. And then lastly, being able to explain the connection between stress and how it affects the cardiovascular system in particular, a little more detail here, specifically with hypertension, CHD, coronary heart disease, and cancer. There's some interesting connections to stress in those three various illnesses. Okay, so that covers chapter 4. Got your lecture slides here. And then we've got the discussion for module 3. Again, you're completing an assessment and taking a look at that. And then you're answering the below questions here. And they all have to do with the chapter topic in the longevity book, which is, are you a moody worrier? So are you a worrywart? Do you worry? Do you get very moody and worried over life circumstances? And how might this hurt you? Be able to explain this using examples from the termites. You're going to be getting to know now some of the termites that are mentioned by name, John and Linda and various people. How do they fare? If you have a cheerful disposition, where does that leave you? If you're more neurotic and anytime you have something wrong, you're very focused on that and very thinking about it over and over, ruminating, how does that affect you? How is that related to longevity? As you'll find, it can be good sometimes, right, in terms of getting to the doctor, but it actually has a lot of negative effects. A neurotic individual tends to be a worrywart and worries too much, and can have negative effects on health. But what is helpful worrying, right? So it's really deciphering between what's helpful and what's not in terms of worrying behavior. Okay, I put the cite as you write instructions because I just want to make sure that everybody is carefully citing when you're using examples from Friedman and Martin's Longevity Project book. You want to cite them, Friedman and Martin, and the year of the book, I think it's 2011. Anytime you pull something from there, you want to cite that. Anytime you pull something from Serafino and Smith, you want to cite that with 2017 being the date. If you pull a direct quote, you need to be putting it in quotation marks, and you need to be putting the page number of where that quote's from. That's proper citation. And just so that you know what that looks like, you can just, click on this one-page document. I have just some examples for you of how to cite properly in APA format. Okay, and then lastly, this brings you to the end of week 2. Okay, so week 2, you're covering 2 modules. You're covering module 3, and then you're covering module 2, which we talked about in the last podcast. And then for the exam at the end of this week, it covers everything that we've done so far. Okay, so it will cover chapters 1, 3, and 4, along with the physiological modules from chapter 2, which are modules 1, 2, 5, and 6. Okay, so you can go back to your syllabus. Is always a great place to go to make sure you got it straight and you got everything in there. There's 50 questions on the exam, 50 minutes to take it. It is closed notes and closed text, but obviously I can't monitor that, so it's on our system. But if you are trying to look stuff up, it's going to take you longer and you're not going to have enough time to finish. Okay, so always have a backup plan and make sure you leave enough time to complete that exam. Okay, thanks everyone.